Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Floripa Olguin. I am from the Pueblo of Isleta as well as Navajo Nation. Um, I am the Sexual Violence Project Coordinator with the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. And joining me today is the Sex Trafficking Coordinator at the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, Michele Curtis. I believe she is on her way to her laptop at the moment, so she will be able to introduce herself when she joins us. Yes, I'm very excited to join you all today and to speak on this topic about sexual violence in tribal communities. And yeah, if we're all ready to begin, we can start. Are we ready, Kelsey?
Yes, we are ready.
Okay, sounds great. And then if Michele happens to log on, please feel free to just jump in and so that you can introduce yourself when you're able to. Okay. So this is us, the facilitators. This is myself when I had longer hair when I first joined the coalition. And this is Michele Curtis. I also want to take a moment to introduce my pronouns. I use any pronouns, but I use she, they, and he as like a guide. So you feel free to like use them interchangeably. And yeah, so thank you. So a little bit about the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. We're based out in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the moment, but our service area is pretty expansive. We cover the all of New Mexico as well as Isleta del Sur in Texas area, as well as the Four Corners area. Our mission is to stop violence against Native women and children by advocating for social change in our communities. The coalition takes ownership and responsibility for the future of Native women and children by providing support, education, and advocacy, using our strengths, power, and unity to create violence-free communities. And so our four core areas that we cover are training, technical assistance, and policy advocacy, as well as support. We've gone through some of the housekeeping items, but I just wanted to know to please use the chat box for any questions or comments. And then feel free to use the raise hand function if you want to unmute. And then Michele and I will be on standby if you have any questions as well. Some helpful tips for going through this like training is to really know that this material can be heavy and can cause discomfort. So we encourage you to take care of yourself and to use these tips to help you during this training. It would be helpful to have medicine nearby, such as sage, cedar, or medicine bundles, and grounding tools such as Play-Doh, stress balls, or fidget spinners. It also looks like Michele is able to join us, so I'll have her introduce herself when she is able to. But also, we recommend that to come with comfy clothes and headphones if needed, and also to choose a space to learn from with stable internet, and then choose a place that suits you, such as like near a window or somewhere where you can get fresh air. Also, keep water and healthy snacks nearby as you go through the training. And then be gentle with yourself and take breaks as needed. And then one last tip that we have is a breathing exercise to engage in. So the breathing exercise is to breathe in for 7 seconds, hold your breath for 7 seconds, and then breathe out for 7 seconds. And then to repeat as needed. So we hope these tips will help you throughout the training, just to take care of yourself and be mindful. So next, I want to cover a little bit of community agreements for our discussion today. I want us to be able to go through these agreements, and if there's anything that you would like to add, to just be able to put it in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself. And then if there is agreement, just to like put up an emoji at the end. But I'll just go through the statements and we can agree. So just as a community, just to agree to the Vegas rule, that learning leaves and the names and stories stay here. Also to share the air, and then to challenge yourself to be respectful of each other's feelings, perspectives, abilities, and identities, as well as your own. Remember, it's not just the intent that matters, but also the impact. And be the expert in your own experience. Use I statements. Be okay with silence. Sometimes silence is a good processing tool. So sometimes just having having space to just breathe is good to just process what is being learned. And the next, leave space for processing and after processing, both inside and outside of the space. So that's just to say to take care of yourself, to take time to process the information presented today. And if that means stepping away while we're presenting, then please take care of yourself and do so. Next, we would ask to reserve the right to change your mind. Sometimes the information presented can really challenge your core beliefs about whether it's what you learned in history or in your upbringing. And so we really like to just allow you space to change your mind. And so I just want to ask if you are all in agreement to just put an emoji or type agree in the chat. So I'm seeing a few agrees as they're coming in the chat. And I just want to know that this is really like a living document. And so if there's anything that you want to add, please feel free to add them throughout the actual training. And this is really just to foster a community space in which we're taking care of each other and practicing community care. So if we're in agreement, I'm going to move forward. Thank you all so much for your agreement. And so before we begin with the objectives, I just wanted to note again to practice self and community care. The topics that we're going to be discussing can cause some discomfort, but we really want to give you the space to take care of yourself as well. So before we begin with the objectives, I just want to give Michele a moment to introduce herself. Here you go, Michele. So I think you're muted.
Sorry, I'll do that again. Yat she Michele Curtis Yanishya, Hawanthlana Nishle, Matdishkiji Bashichin, Tetnazani Dishiche, Auto Tachini Dishanele. Hello, everyone. My name is Michele Curtis. I am the Sex Trafficking Project Coordinator with the Coalition, and I'm happy to be here. I'm originally from Nenahnezad, New Mexico, which is in the Four Corners area. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and facilitating this training with Floripa. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Michele. I just want to go over the objectives for this discussion today. So we'll begin with an overview of the statistical information of sexual violence against Native women, as well as contextualizing it with the impacts of European contact and colonization. Then we'll provide an overview of vocabulary, such as a definition of sexual violence, consent, and power and control, rape culture, and gender-based violence. Next, we also want to discuss support for survivors through informal and formal means, and as well as the importance of believing survivors. I will begin now with the statistical information. So I understand that for some, this may be information that they know. Please forgive me if this is sort of a review, but I think it's really important to just contextualize this with the information so that moving forward, there's a common understanding. So according to the data today, 84% of Native women, or 4 in 5, have experienced violence in their lifetime. 56.1% of Native women have experienced sexual violence, and 55.5% have been physically hurt by an intimate partner. 48.8% have been a victim of stalking, and 66.4% experience psychological aggression by an intimate partner. Overall, more than 1.5 million Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. We wanted to talk a little bit about violence against LGBTQ and Two-Spirit relatives. We wanted to include the words of a really important figure within the Native LGBTQ and Two-Spirit movement today. Lenny Hayes is an advocate who is really working towards building up the information needed to understand violence against LGBTQ and Two-Spirit relatives. And one thing he states is that while there is no accurate data that represents the rates of domestic and sexual violence that occurs within the Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ community, it occurs all the same. Unfortunately, this lack of data creates the false idea that domestic violence and sexual violence are not experienced within this community. And so we really want to share this with you to understand that within the data, that there is a lack of data, and it's important to extend the understanding that violence can occur in LGBTQ and Two-Spirit community. And so we have some statistics as a whole that kind of detail what the rates of violence are. So currently 40% of lesbian women and 61% of bisexual women, compared to 35% of heterosexual women, experience rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And then 25% of gay men and 37% of bisexual men, compared to 29% of heterosexual men, experience rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner at some point in their lifetime. So it's really important to understand that violence, and especially sexual violence, can occur no matter what orientation or identity you hold, and that it's important to be there for our Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Native relatives. So I'm gonna allow Michele to speak a little bit about her experience with LGBTQ and Two-Spirit community with regards to her work at First Nations, as well as sex trafficking. advocacy work. And yeah, Michele.
Thank you, Floripa. So in my background, I used to be a direct service provider and I managed a program that provided case management to victims and survivors of human trafficking. So within Albuquerque area, within this urban area, I would see a high percentage of Indigenous relatives who are being victimized by sex trafficking. And lately I've been noticing that with this situation, they only highlight women, but they overlook the LGBTQ2+ community. And the clientele I would work with case management, I would say like 80% of them were from the transgender community. And here I have from the Sovereign Body Institute, they documented 23 MMIWR who were trans women or two-spirit. So 1 in 5 were victims of sex trafficking or in survival sex work. So it's very important to look at the overview of who is being victimized. And the LGBTQ community, they, like I said, they're always overlooked, and we need more data on like women or females, males, LGBTQ2+, like it's a broad number of people who are being victimized, and it's important to highlight this. Thank you, Floripa. And then here, these are the most current data we have right now with the MMIWR task force. We are trying to collect updated data, but as of right now, this is what we have, and this is within the state of New Mexico. So this is accurate numbers of domestic and sexual violence in tribal communities and the rate of exposure to violence for Native youth. So 30% of Native trafficking victims say they were previously in foster care. And when you think of this, you think of, the boarding school era, you think of placement programs in religious settings, and also, because of Indigenous communities, they have a high percentage of substance abuse and alcohol abuse. This is also a factor in why Native youth are put into foster care. And, they are abused in foster care. So we need to highlight that also. Like, we need to acknowledge there is abuse in foster care. And on this, the other data, we have 84% of Native women affected by violence. 60% is crimes in tribal communities and that are involved with sexual violence.
Thank you, Michele. I'm going to detail some of this, the information about sexual violence in tribal communities in this next upcoming slide. Because as it stands, as Michele said, the majority of the crimes committed in tribal communities in New Mexico are sexual violence. And so overall, 1 in 3 Native women have experienced some form of sexual assault, and Native women are 2.5 times more likely to experience rape than other women in the nation. And this is really contextualized alongside the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, trans, and two-spirit crisis that is happening today, because sexual violence is a factor with regard to sex trafficking that's happening within a community. It can be a factor of sex trafficking. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about violence and its place within the tribal communities that I come from Navajo and Pueblo communities. And I just really want to talk about this in terms of thinking about the ways in which Pueblo and my people and Native peoples have lived before 1492, and how we have worked to preserve those customs and those ways of life through time since colonization. And so with that, I really want to state that violence is not traditional in our tribal communities. And some of the ways in which this like shows itself is the strong belief systems that many Native communities have about respecting and having reverence for Native women. Also, community and restorative justice systems that exist within tribal communities, and cultural beliefs about self-conduct, as well as kinship systems, which also influence beliefs about self-conduct. And also just the belief that accountability at the individual level translates to the whole collective. That when sexual assault happens in a tribal community, it is a harm that impacts everybody, and that it's a harm that needs to be restored on a community level as well as an individual level. And so I want to ask you all if you're familiar with this painting. If you're able to put in the chat whether you've seen this painting before or if you're familiar with its depiction. Some have said yes, some have said no. Yes, it is Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny, yes. This is a painting that details Manifest Destiny. And the reason why we really like to, someone said that they saw it in another training. And the reason why we really like to talk about this painting is just because it really visually shows the interruptions that, the disruptions that happen throughout colonization against tribal ways of life and community. So as you can see, we have this figure of like seemingly angelic white woman that is walking through the land, and you can see that there's changes happening, such as the rail, the trains, and there are the animals that are indigenous to this land, such as the buffalo that are leaving that area, and as well as the Native peoples that are moving westward, it seems. And so this really just shows that the impacts of colonization through time, and the fact that through this time, sexual violence was a tool of oppression that was also impacting Native peoples. So to detail this more, the impacts of colonization really include the murder, genocide, and the implanting of patriarchy into Native systems and ways of life. The system of settler colonialism really had a lasting impact on tribal communities, especially because in spaces in which it used to be traditional Native land may be occupied due to settler colonialism. Also, the addition of systemic racism, both institutional and structural, has implications within colonization and the violence that is experienced by Natives today. Additionally, there is continued violence against Native women throughout time, which includes sex trafficking, murder, femicide, as well as forced sterilization. Overall, colonization is a form of genocide, and it's really the first power and control model on a massive scale. And for our tribal communities, the hierarchy model is not natural to our communities and the way that we conduct ourselves. So I want to get into a little bit about talking about the terms to really understand how colonization impacted and really contextualizes where we stand today with sexual violence in tribal communities. So first, I wanted to discuss a little bit about what is consent. I want to ask the group with us today, what are your ideas of consent? And if you need to draw from some ideas on the slide, I have a definition, which is from the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, which states that consent is an agreement between participants to engage in sexual activity. Consent should be clearly and freely communicated. A verbal and affirmative expression of consent can help both you and your partner to understand and respect each other's boundaries. And then I would go on to contextualize this in terms of a non-sexual situation and state that consent is really about asking a person to do something. And then there was a participant who said FRIES, an acronym FRIES, freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, specific. I think that's a great acronym. I really love that. Thank you for contributing that. If anyone really works well with acronyms, that's like a really great one to use. And so if you would like an example of consent, I would like to share one with you all. I have a video to share with you. And I'm going to stop my share screen so I can switch to the video. Just allow one moment, please.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no, thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
Are there any initial reactions to this video? I know that there were some folk who said that that it's their favorite, also that they love it. This gave me life. Yes, other folk also use this in their trainings as well. Yeah, I really like to use this because I think it's just a really accessible way to just think about consent. And I think especially if you can't get your mind around like matching it to sexual activity, then it kind of contextualizes it into a different situation so you get it better. But yeah, thank you all for sharing your thoughts. And yeah, let's continue. Oops, 1 second, my screen is still stuck in the full screen mode. So now that we have an understanding of consent, I want to move forward to define sexual violence. Before we define sexual violence, I just want to take a moment to take like a deep breath as a group. So if you all just to help like relieve any stress, any tension from what we've learned so far. And so yes, really to define sexual violence, it's any sexual behavior that happens without a person's consent. And so this can go through different actions, and some that we note here are just rape, incest, marital rape, statutory rape, forced oral sex, child sexual abuse, and sexual harassment. So we would really contextualize this around a spectrum of violence that really escalates from whistling to verbal comments all the way to sexual coercion, sexual exploitation, incest, and rape. So these actions of violence can really have an impact on any one person and really display a show of power and control that a person is enacting against another person. I would like to give space to Michele to go into a little detail about power and control. Michele?
Yeah. So what Floripa listed here is mostly with DV situations, but when you look into sex trafficking, it's more than this. With sex trafficking, the trafficker, they're sometimes looked at as the boyfriend, husband. They have this power over the victims. And this goes into like, you know, having them work hours on the streets and having them being watched. And this deals with mental, spiritual, and physical health. So when I was a drug service provider, you know, the relatives that would come in to seek help, they would mention they can't sleep, they don't feel safe, even when they're in a safe shelter. They can't sleep because they feel like there are abusers around, there are traffickers around. So, you know, we have to look at the whole aspect of power and control. It doesn't just deal with intimate partners. It deals with a person who claims to love the person who's being victimized. And, you know, you see like what's listed, it's just a whole broad, like it goes into child sexual abuse, incest, rape, stalking. And it for me, when I used to work with clients, it was sad. It was very sad for me to see them go through this, because I'm trying to put them in a safe place, but they still have this control over them, even though their trafficker abuser is not around. And so everyone, like, it's important to know that, you know, power and control, it leads to PTSD. I had a client who when I was a case manager, I recently housed, and she was in a safe place. She was away from her trafficker, and she was from one of the northern tribes. I can't remember what tribe, but she was recently housed. I helped her get housed, and as a case manager, we would do like weekly visits with clients who are recently housed through a housing program. And with her, I went to her home, and she had bells on her door because she was so traumatized that her trafficker would find her, and she had bells on her door for her to alert her when she was asleep. And that, for me, that was just, it broke my heart to see that. But with power and control, you know, I've seen that a lot with the victims who were, you know, human trafficked or sex trafficked. Thank you, Floripa.
Thank you, Michele. So I want to talk a little bit about rape culture, and to provide a definition, and especially to discuss the ways rape culture can really also exist in tribal communities. So as I give this definition, just also reflect on maybe the ways that you've encountered it in your own tribal communities. So we define rape culture as a cycle of fear in which rape and sexual violence is normalized and excused in the popular media and culture. So some ways that rape culture is shown in our daily lives can be the idea that boys will be boys, victim blaming, such as saying that she asked for it, or the person who was assaulted asked for it. Also, teaching some groups of people to not get raped instead of teaching everyone not to rape is a cycle within rape culture that exists today. Please feel free to throw in the chat any examples of rape culture that you have seen or seen in your experience as well. So one example that I will give is just a reaction from the media after a girl was raped. So CNN reacted by saying that the boys were promising students. ABC News made excuses for the rapists. NBC News lamented the boys' promising football careers, and USA Today had stressed that the victim was drunk. So these are all examples of the ways in which rape culture and victim blaming exists within larger media. But these also can, these kinds of belief systems can also find themselves in our own communities. And it's really important to believe survivors and to center that when it comes to when someone discloses to you that they may have experienced sexual assault or rape. So some ways to address rape culture in our communities is to really avoid using language that objectifies or degrades women. Also to speak out if you hear someone making an offensive joke or trivializing rape. If a friend says that she has been raped or if they have been raped, believe them and be supportive. Also, it's important to think critically about media messages about women, men, and relationships and violence. And also be respectful of physical space, even in casual situations. Especially as we go through the pandemic and different ideas around personal space can change. It's important to be respectful and mindful of what people are safe with regards to their personal space. And then also to communicate with sexual partners and to not assume consent. And then also, even further, is to get involved. Joining a student group or a community group such as SASO or CSVANW, working to end violence against women is a really great way to get involved and to really end the cycle of rape culture in our communities. So I just, due to some of the time that we have left today, I just want to cover a little bit about gender-based violence and to really contextualize this around that this includes rape, sexual assault, intimate partner violence, both in heterosexual and gay partnerships, as well as sexual harassment, stalking, and sex trafficking. So gender-based violence is really important to talk about because there can be sexual and reproductive health consequences to gender-based violence, which includes forced and unwanted pregnancies, unsafe abortions, or sexually transmitted infections, or even death. Just to touch a little bit about what's within gender-based violence is a definition of the patriarchy as well as the heteropatriarchy. So really the patriarchy is a system of society or government in which men hold power and women are largely excluded from it. And then women and children are treated as chattel and experience many forms of abuse. This is also extended into heteropatriarchy, which is a social political system where primarily cisgender males and heterosexual people have authority over cisgender females and folks of varying gender identities, as well as non-heterosexual orientations. Just to talk a little bit about how this connects to colonization, really the history of sexual violence and genocide of Native women really shows how gender-based violence functions as a tool for racism and colonialism. And within that, it's important to address like toxic masculinity that exists within tribal communities. And the reason why we define it as toxic is because it promotes violence, domestic violence, rape culture, and sexual violence. And usually it promotes the stereotypes of men as socially dominant, as well as some traits such as misogynistic, homophobic, or transphobic behavior. And so in order to address like toxic masculinity, it's important to learn about gender-based violence and how it functions against those who are not cisgender males. So an example of gender-based violence that we see today is sex trafficking. And I'll let Michele go into a little detail about that. And yeah, just to do a time check, we're at 53, and I just want to make sure with Kelsey that just to make sure that we end on time.
Okay.
Yeah. You guys are welcome to go a little over as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So with sex trafficking, why are Native people targeted for human traffickers? You can write in the chat box. But here I'm going to explain. So there's different forms of violence and social factors contributed to trafficking of Native women, girls, and relatives. And here I'm going to explain why. So there's social factors attributed. So the reservation, it's a rural area. There's so many jurisdictions. Those are barriers. And who comes on to these tribal communities? Non-natives. And I don't know exactly how different tribes, governments, and laws work, but with Navajo Nation, if you're a non-native and you commit a crime on Navajo Nation, you won't be considered a perpetrator. It has to go through the FBI. So jurisdiction is a huge, huge barrier within our tribal communities, and each tribal government is different. So, traffickers, they're really smart on who to go after. They look at their vulnerability. They look at, people who are suffering through poverty and family abuse, and they make them look like the heroes. So these victims can turn to them and be like, okay, this is my way out. And so right now, the rural areas is a huge barrier, and the lack of law enforcement and services available. Like I said, I don't know other tribal governments or law enforcements right now, but with the Navajo Nation, we are short-staffed with Navajo Nation police. So if someone called 911 and asking for police, the time limit would be like 3 to 4 hours. And this is firsthand experience. I've experienced this living on Navajo Nation. So that's the barrier we're dealing with right now, is jurisdictional barriers and the lack of law enforcement. Thank you, Floripa.
Thank you, Michele. We had a really, the comments are really firing off in the chat. And one that I'd like to add to like what was discussed was like the fetishization of Native peoples as part of like the trafficking issue that exists today.
Okay, I see it now. So with the reason why traffickers and abusers go after Native people is because we are looked at as versatile. You know, we can be classified as Asians, Hispanics, Middle Eastern. You know, we have that look where these traffickers they can, you know, victimize Native people and project them as something else. That's what I mean by you know, why we're targeted by you know, being a fetish. And that's, you know, I've seen that here, especially in Albuquerque.
Oh, excuse me. And so these are some of the signs of trafficking. If Michele, if you'd like to.
Yes. So here, as being a direct service provider in my my former job, these are the signs of trafficking I've seen. So changes of behavior, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and mentally. Drug and alcohol dependency, sexually inappropriate behaviors, loss of sense and time, problems at school and work, avoiding abuser, trafficker, being fearful, nervous, and anxious, avoids eye contact and conversations, signs of self-harm, conversations of a new older friend and relative, not wanting to be alone with a specific person. Victims have a few to no personal possessions, no control over his or their own money, no IDs, claims to be visiting, like couch surfing. So here in Albuquerque, a lot of our Indigenous relatives, they have gone through this. They would tell me, oh, like our younger victims. I think the youngest one I case managed, she was 13. And she stated, I have this older man friend, he's in his 40s, and he provides me to get my hair done, my nails done, he pays for my phone bill, but yeah, she has to do something in return. So, you know, that's what we're dealing with, and it's sad because she doesn't realize, you know, she's being victimized of trafficking because she's just 13. And with our adults, they say, oh, he's my boyfriend. Oh, he proposed to me. He's going to be my husband. But yeah, I have to do these sexual acts. And so when I would case manage these victims in Albuquerque, you know, like all of them, high percentage of them had drug alcohol dependency. And, you know, they didn't know they were being victimized of trafficking. And this is only, like, they normalize this of survival because the majority of victims of trafficking, they are homeless, from the homeless population. So this is their only way of survival, knowing that, you know, I'm going to get a somewhere warm to sleep, a bed to sleep on. Someone's going to feed me. And this is what I've worked with in, you know, when I was a case manager. So, you know, here I listed no IDs or important documents. You know, the trafficker would take their IDs, birth certificates, CIBs, and they would threaten them, like, I know who your family, I know where they live. If you run away from me, I'm going to, you know, kill your family members. So this is real life in urban areas with victims of sex trafficking and human trafficking.
And we do have a question in the chat. Does VAWA only allow tribal authorities to have jurisdiction in cases of domestic violence and not rape?
So I'm gonna have to follow up with the jurisdictional question. I can follow up by email. I can provide my email at the end of this session, but if they would also like to message me their email, I could follow up on this particular question about jurisdiction.
Okay, then there's another one from Rachel. You probably already said this, but this is cross-racial with the perpetrator being white and male.
Is this in regards to sex trafficking, Rachel?
She said yes.
Yes. So with tribal governments, they have jurisdictions. So if the crime was committed on tribal lands, then, you know, if it deals with murder or like a higher rate of crime, they would have the FBI involved. So with these MMIWR task forces across the nations, they're trying to, you know, update these policies and laws so everyone who's a perpetrator can be prosecuted.
And then in terms of the information about perpetrators, do you know like the demographic that perpetrators often represent? I think well, if so I think that if Michelle isn't available to answer that question, we can just move forward. Or Michelle?
So with well, like I said, I just know Navajo Nation laws. So if they're non-native, they wouldn't be prosecuted with the tribal jurisdiction area. They would go through the federal.
But do you find that like what I think the question is like what is the background, the racial background of
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, so right now that's being reported. There was a recent case of human trafficking in Shiprock, New Mexico with agricultural farms due to like marijuana farmlands. There was a lot of Asian people who were like refugees and undocumented who were hired to work on these farms. So the perpetrator is native, but then when you go deep into it, it's non-native. And right now with like drug trafficking, there are non-natives coming onto tribal lands, you know, for their infrastructures, and so that's being reported. So I would say yes, non-natives are the perpetrators right now. And then I'm seeing Facebook Live, Kim.
Yeah, Kim's just expressing her own experiences of trafficking, and yeah, just putting those in the chat for you to read.
So Kim, thank you for sharing your story. I'm reading it here. Let's see here. So, Kim, you're saying you're being blackmailed. Let's see her. I'm trying to understand this. Yes. So with the MMIWR task force, we are trying to educate everyone that's involved, even in urban areas. And right now, I know a few APD sergeants are on the task force, even Farmington, I forget where else, but we are trying to educate everyone on what victims of sex trafficking and human trafficking, what they go through. And we don't want to victimize them because, they're being coerced into doing these acts. And so, I am grateful that this task force is trying to address those issues, because that's not fair for the victim, being forced to do these criminal acts when, if they don't do it, they're going to be abused.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Kim, for this discussion that we're having. I think it's so important just to be able to process with this information. And so, like I said in the community agreements, just be sure to give yourself time to process after. And then also, if you need time during, just that is okay as well. So I know we're going a little bit over time, and I just want to thank you all so much for your patience and your time. So I just want to go through our last section. If you have any questions, please feel free to follow up. I'll provide my email in the chat, and as well as Michelle will provide hers as well. So if you have any questions or any follow-up, we'll be available as well. So I just want to talk a little bit about support for survivors. So a lot of the times, survivors will seek informal support, and estimates range from 58 to 94%. There is access to formal support services such as law enforcement, medical care for a forensic exam, as well as mental health services. Some reasons why a survivor might report can be to gain a sense of justice or to regain sense of control, as well as closure. And then some reasons why a survivor might not report could be the fear of the legal system, as well as confidentiality and privacy, especially in tribal communities. It might be hard for a survivor to receive a confidential, to feel as if there is confidentiality just because of the nature of close-knit communities, and also the relationship to the perpetrator. Overall, it's important to reinforce the agency to the survivor and to really center them when it comes to their decision about whether they will report or not. These are some barriers to services in tribal communities. There might be rural tribal communities where there are dirt roads or back roads, some isolation, and a longer law enforcement response time. There also might be some telecommunication issues, such as internet and cellular service. Some ways to create support for survivors is to bring understanding, to ask what the survivor needs in that moment. It's really important to think that sometimes what a survivor needs might just be a glass of water and something, a snack, a PB and jelly to nourish them if they hadn't eaten in a couple hours. So sometimes it's just important to remember to go back to the basics when helping a survivor. And then also, it's important to foster trust and meet them where they are, and to establish an affirming space. This is some formal information for advocates, and if there's information that you find helpful as a community member, that's also really great. But I just want to give Michele a moment to go through this as well.
Yes, thank you, Floripa. So here I'm going to talk about safety planning information, and anyone can do this. Family members, advocates, case managers, social workers. So it's very important to, if you get someone coming in fleeing from their abuser or trafficker, and for me, it's like it takes them a huge step to walk into a place for help. And safety planning is very important. So here, being a social worker, advocate, or case manager, we do have assessments, and we want to prepare a plan for them to turn to, if they ever run into their abuser or trafficker. And so here I listed a safety plan, and you don't have to be working as a case manager or advocate. If you're a family member, you can even do this with your loved ones or friends. So you want to assess the current risk and identify current and potential safety concerns, and create strategies for avoiding or reducing the threat of the harm. Outline concrete options for responding victims. Safety planning is important. If the victim is experiencing trafficking during the process of leaving, and once the victim has left, considered tips for conducting safety planning for victims of human trafficking, as well as those who may be considering suspicious jobs or relationships. Because most of the time, people who are victimized of trafficking who are not familiar what human trafficking is, they normalize being trafficked, like working odd jobs and not getting paid, being sex workers, or even panhandling or being drug runners. So they don't realize they're being trafficked. And then each individual is at the best position to assess his or her own current level of safety. And this is important because I've had many people I've helped who are being human trafficked who didn't even realize they're being trafficked. They were just offered a warm place to stay, food, and then they were forced to do all these things against their will. So it's important to have a safety planning information. When I used to be a direct service provider, a lot of the victims of human trafficking, they would list me as their point of contact. And for me, that's okay if, they want to call me and let me know that they're in trouble. That's okay. And that's when I was a case manager. So I want to highlight this. It is very, very, very vital to have the safety planning with people you're working with who are being abused, sexualized, and trafficked.
Thank you, Michele. So I'm just gonna talk about this briefly. So just to note that to discuss consent and sexual violence in your home, it's important to talk to your family about correct names for body parts, as well as body safety, what is okay touch and not okay touch, and that private parts are private. And also to have open and safe communication with no shaming and no secrets, to create a safe space for communication. At the community level, it's important to have discussions about healthy relationships, boundaries, cultural values, dating, online behavior, expectations, as well as spiritual and religious values. Opportunities such as this symposium are really great places to have these discussions, and also to even network and find people who want to have this discussion in your community. Finally, there are ways to continue supporting. The one way that I really like to talk about is the Start by Believing campaign. You can find this on the startbybelieving.org website. It's a campaign that really centers survivors and really starting by believing survivors. We would really like to encourage you all to encourage sexual violence training and education for tribal leaders, social workers, healthcare workers, and law enforcement. And finally, we have, there's a video that we also like to share in our trainings. And so we wanted to include this here in terms of ways that you can continue supporting. So when we follow up, and we can share these slides with Kelsey as well, you can have access to this video. So just to close off and leave you all with a reflection question, I just want to ask, what are ways you can show up for survivors in our tribal communities? So be sure to reflect on this question and think about it as we all adjourn. And I want to thank you all so much for your participation and your willingness to really participate in today's discussion. And yeah, reflect on the question, and if you have an answer now, feel free to answer it in the chat. And yeah, we are open for questions. And if we are really out of time right now, we can also take those questions via email as displayed right here. Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed this training and being in and sharing space with you all. And thank you so much to Kelsey for organizing this symposium.
Yes, thank you, everyone.